It is my great pleasure to take you through Yad Vashem's exhibition, ready to print online, called Spots of Light: To Be a Woman in the Holocaust. And I'll tell you a little bit about the exhibition, and then I will show you my favorite stories, because basically what this exhibition does is it puts a human face on the differences in experience and also in response between men and women in the Holocaust. So it gives expression to the unique voice of Jewish women in the Holocaust, their choices and their responses in the face of the evil, brutality, and relentless hardship that they were forced to grapple with. It explores matters that occurred at the intimate level, at the whispering level. So when we talk about their voices in the frozen stillness, these are the smaller stories. They're not the big public stories, but they're the smaller stories of one woman at a time that create empathy and bring it down to that very individual level. So let's talk. You have to start with motherhood, because motherhood is one of the real things that distinguished men's experiences from women's experiences in the Holocaust. And let me just say, society is very different today. We are 80 years after these events, and society is very different. It's possible that in same-sex couples, there is a partner who would be more, we still use the word maternal, but that just goes to show you where it comes from. All I'm trying to say is women had these experiences and had these choices because that same-sex couples did not exist back then. So it was the woman to whom this job fell of taking care of children, unlike in many cases today. So that having been said, let me move right along here. Motherhood, the need to save their children placed women in the face of terrible dilemmas. And I want to tell you one story. There were many dilemmas that we can talk about. I mean, a mother who does not have enough food to feed her children. Who does she give that food to? Does she ration it out equally? Does she give it to the child with the best chance of surviving? Does she give it to the child who's sick with the least chance of surviving? This is a terrible, terrible dilemma. These are choiceless choices. And there are so many of them, but the story that's featured in Spots of Light is the story of Genia Yutsky, who was from Sosnowiec, Poland. And you can see Genia here with her husband, Bronek, or Bear. They were a married couple and they survived in the Sosnowiec ghetto. But the ghetto was liquidated in August of 1943, and Genia's husband was murdered. So now, again, Genia needs to step in and figure out what she's going to do. How is she going to save herself? How is she going to save her child? And just to show, I'll show you a picture of her child, Michael, in just a minute. And what Genia decides to do is basically, Genia was a very educated woman. She was a graduate of the Sorbonne. She spoke German fluently. She spoke French fluently. And because of this, this terrific ability of hers, she was able to get to the Aryan side and get herself a job working for a doctor. And she was also running the household of this doctor. And she was also able to place Michael, her son, with a Polish woman who was going to take care of him. The doctor at some point has to leave for Vienna, and he offers Genia to come along with him. Now, here's the question. Okay, and this is Genia together with Michael, and I want to read you a letter that is in Spots of Light that Genia writes to Bronya, the woman who is taking care of Michael, while she is masquerading as an Aryan. 27th September 1943, dear Miss Bronya, it is so hard for me to write to you. Lately, terrible things have been happening to me. Life is too cruel. Miss Bronya, I beg you, look after my son, be a mother to him. My dear Bronya, give him everything with all your heart, and I will be grateful to you until the end of my days. He is so clever and he has a good heart. I am sure that you can find it in your heart to love him. Michael should eat as much as he can, for who knows what is to come. He must be strong and able to endure great suffering. Please make sure that he dresses warmly and that he also wears socks. I cannot write anymore. My tears have all dried up. May God watch over you both. I just want to pause here for a second. because it's easy to read the words and not to think about what's going on behind it. This is a woman who is separated from her son. She knows that another woman is looking after him, but is this woman looking after him as well as she would have? Is this woman taking care of him? Imagine how she is suffering having to be so far from her son. And she writes a little appendix to Michael. My beloved Michale, are you playing with the other children? Are you getting along well with Miss Branya? Write me a few lines every day. That way you'll learn to write me long letters. Take care of yourself. Sleep in the warm pajamas that I gave you. Kisses, Mother. Sleep in the warm pajamas that I gave you. It kind of tears your heart out because that's what she's telling him, because she can't tell him, I did this for you because I'm trying to keep you alive. I'm not with you because I think maybe you're in better hands. She can't write that. So she writes, sleep in the warm pajamas that I gave you. And the tragic ending of this story is that ultimately when that German physician that Genya was working for relocates to Vienna and asks her to come with him, Genya is actually caught. She has to make a very fateful decision. What about Michael? She's afraid what will happen in the place where he is. She has put him in an orphanage at this point, and she decides that Michael is better off with her. Well, in the end, Genya and Michael are sent to Auschwitz, and all of the children in the orphanage survived. So how can you know? You make a choice and you have to live by it or die by it in this case. And that is one of those tragic stories where a woman, because she is a mother, is forced to make a choice like this. I'm going to take you from this very dark and very tragic story to something maybe a little bit lighter, and that is womanhood. You talk about womanhood. What do we mean by this? The assertion of femininity. And sometimes it was the assertion of femininity that allowed women to struggle to maintain their humanity, because women were dehumanized all throughout the Holocaust, but they were affected by dehumanization much differently than men were. Just looking at some of the pictures these are the famous pictures that come to us from the Auschwitz album that was found after the war. And these are pictures of women at Auschwitz, at Birkenau, after a selection, after they have been selected actually to become slave laborers in Auschwitz. And I want to play you a very, very quick segment of a film that Yad Vashem did about the Auschwitz album, Guidelines for Educators. Just for a second.
They quickly led us to this place, to some building called the sauna, the bathhouse. We waited in line for hours. We still had our own clothes and our own long hair. We still had everything. We huddled close to one another. We felt safer as long as we were together. After waiting around for a few hours, we noticed these very strange figures walking around behind the building, behind the wall. And we thought it was some sort of madhouse. We just didn't know who they were. And then it was finally our turn. And we walked into the bathhouse, we got undressed. And there were workers, Polish prisoners, men. We had to undress, and the SS officers were inside, and we were young girls. We were supposed to undress and walk around naked. They shaved us, but everything was happening with awful screams and with shouting, so that we felt that there was nothing we could ask anymore, and nothing to be embarrassed about. We were just in a state of total shock. It happened all at once. There was no more shame or disgrace, just shock. Young girls walking around naked. They were shaving their entire bodies, everywhere, on top and on bottom. When it was all over and we came out on the other side of the building, we realized those crazy people were now us. And we had suddenly turned into animals in every way, because we couldn't even recognize one another. And in that moment we lost our humanity. We lost all our friends. My best friend was standing right next to me and I couldn't even recognize her. That was it. We couldn't recognize each other. And then the terrible yelling started. Olga, Magda, Helena, Rosinka. We were searching for each other. After that, there were scenes. It was just so horrifying, and we were in such despair that all we could do was cry or scream or kill ourselves. So we just started laughing. We were laughing hysterically, just to cope with the horror, with the terror that our own minds couldn't comprehend.
Here's the point. The Nazis tried to deprive the Jews of their lives. The Jews tried to survive. And for women, although you can look at things like hair and clothing as indulgences, womanhood as indulgences, it's an important part of femininity. It's an important component of personality. So what the Nazis did when they shaved women and removed all their hair from all over their bodies, they were deconstructing their personalities. And so when the women exited the sauna, they had to marshal their inner forces and reconstruct their personalities so they could feel like people. What am I talking about? This is what women looked like after they had been shaved. Their hair was taken away, their names were taken away, their personalities were gone, all of the things that they brought with them from home, their clothing. Just a couple of quotes. I remember that we stood naked in the sauna in line to have our hair removed, and I wondered, what are all these men doing here? We couldn't recognize one another anymore. I approached one of the Jewish guards and asked him if we would have a word with someone so they wouldn't cut off my pigtails. And he replied that so long as I had a head, hair would grow, while if I didn't have a head, I wouldn't need hair anyway. In other words, shut up because you want to lose your life, or would you rather lose your hair? But the dehumanization of the loss of hair went together with all these men who are milling around in the sauna. Some of them are verbally abusing the prisoners. Some of them are physically touching, that type of thing. And this is why hair becomes such an important thing for women, that they are willing to even risk their lives. This is Margot Fink. Margot was captured. She was a prisoner at Reichenbach, and she worked in a factory where she had access to pieces of wire. And she made this comb to use for when her hair would grow. And Margot realized that she could make this comb, but she could also be severely punished just for having the comb. And yet she was still willing to take that risk. So you say to yourself, okay, so now this is not just fluff. This is something that's serious. This is something that, if a woman who's willing to take a risk like that for a comb, you understand. Women, this is a great quote, women retain their femininity no matter what, even on the brink of death. The prisoners asked seamstresses to cut fitted prisoner gowns and blouses and to add collars and cufflinks to enhance their appearance. The camp commander found out about the alterations, burst into the sewing shop and roared at us, "You Jew bitches, you're sentenced to death and you're being coquettish." And this is the story of Helen Reba, who, if you take a look at her uniform, which we have in the Yad Vashem Museum, first of all, she's got that, it's a terrible, bland, it doesn't, colorless. It's that, what color would you even say that uniform is? And she's got that big cross on the back to distinguish those prisoners from other prisoners. You can see the page from the album that was created by Zofia Rosenstrauch, who illustrated a lot of the scenes from Auschwitz and Birkenau. And what Helen did was she found this little tiny orange bead and she stuck it on her uniform. Why would you do that? Who in their right mind is thinking about a little orange bead? But if looking at that little orange bead makes you feel like a woman, gives you back part of your personality, gives you some color, then you are actually you're doing this so that you can get your personality back. And then it's much more understandable. And just one more great story that I love. This is Lena Barrison and her sisters. Lena's whole family was murdered, other than her sisters. She had been married. She was in Kovno, which is a city in Lithuania, and she had a daughter. Her daughter's name was Shulamit, and Shulamit was taken in the children's action. Now, I want to stop here for a second. This is a different story, not in Spots of Light, but I wanted to bring it home to you. And this is a shoe that Yad Vashem has in its artifact collection that comes from that children's action in Kovno. This was March 27th, 1944. All of the parents in the ghetto were sent to work. And after they were sent to work, the Germans came in and just grabbed all of the children without their parents being there. Dov Cohen, who was one of the adults who working in the Kovno ghetto, when he got home with his wife, they realized that their daughter Hinda, who was a toddler at the time, had been taken, and he went over to her bed and he found one shoe, and he engraved the date. He etched the date of the action into the sole of that shoe. So now imagine Lena, because Lena went through the same experience. She went through the same experience. She lost her daughter, and she's really got to marshal all of her defenses. She's really got to keep herself from falling apart. And now she is in this situation where she's deprived of everything. She's a prisoner. She's wearing a prisoner's uniform. What does she create? And this is really kind of an unexpected story, maybe, because it's a story about underwear. Underwear is something that we usually think of it together with seduction or with hygiene. It's something you wear under your clothes, nobody sees it. But in this circumstance, and probably for many other women, underwear can actually even restore dignity, make you feel like a person, and sometimes even bring you back your individuality. So this is a bra. And I love this story because, you don't think of something like this because it's so basic. Why would you even think of it? But you can see that this quote from Charlotte Delbo, who was a French non-Jewish prisoner at Auschwitz. In Auschwitz, her old self was stripped from her as surely as her clothing and her hair. What do you do to bring back that old self? Lena created a bra. She was a seamstress. And she actually gave up a ration, her full day's ration of food, for a needle that another female prisoner had found in a coat that she was wearing. She manages to get this needle. She finds a shard of glass, and she uses that to cut some cloth. She had access to men's jackets. She ripped out the lining. She was doing this in her head for days. It also gave her something to think about and look forward to and plan. She cuts the men's lining. With that shard of glass that she found, she uses this needle that she traded her food for, and she makes herself a bra. And she says she wore that bra for 7 months until liberation in 1945. So, these are things that maybe we take for granted, maybe we don't think about them, but for women, this was the response. This was, you can even see this as a form of resistance, because anything that brings you back to who you were, that makes you live another day, that makes you fight to live another day, is resistance. And that's why I like this story so much. I think that I will end here. There's so much more that we could say, stories about food, stories about faith, stories about all kinds of other things, all kinds of other responses that women had to the situations that they were put in. But I will let you explore the Spots of Light exhibit yourselves now that it's been translated into Serbian. And I will just say thank you very much. Thank you for being here with me.